Would you ask Mr. Cotton to come back in, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Cotton. Ready to carry on?
Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you very much. When you're ready, Mr. Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Cotton, can we please look at LFB 000899127? This is a consolidated Rule 43 action plan prepared for the subsequent ODCB meeting on the 4th of July 2013, which you may recall. Was this the regular format of the action plan considered by the ODCB at the time?
Yes, it was.
Let's go to the minute of that meeting at LFB 000032729, please. First page of it is there, and you can see that halfway down the list of attendees, your name is there, AC Operational Assurance. Yes?
Yes, sir.
If we go to page 3, item 6, third item from the bottom, you will see that you were instructed to circulate an amended version of the action plan, taking account of the 9 items listed above it. Yes?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. Now, let's just see what you say in your statement, your first statement, please, page 7, paragraph 26. You say, a member of my team at the time, Group Manager Max Disaniaki, was responsible for keeping the action plan up to date. Now, why did you delegate that work to Max Disaniaki? Do you remember?
Yes, because Max was already doing all of the updates on the previous Rule 43 and the SAI action plan, which is where we'd had the previous firefighter injuries and the action plans that flowed from that. So he was already undertaking that role, so it was ideal for him to carry on with that.
I see. When did he start that role?
Oh, I can't remember. It was he'd been working in the Health and Safety Department for a very long time.
Well, I was going to ask you which department he was in. Health and Safety is the case, as he says in his statement. But so you delegated it to him. When you did so, did you provide him, do you remember, with either a list of the 34 pre-inquest action items or the January 2013 edition of the Lindridge report?
No, I didn't. The briefing that I had been given by Gary Reason, who was my manager at the time, was that he wanted, that actually it had been agreed at the Commissioners, either CMB or the Commissioners Group, that the Rule 43 actions would be included in the same way as the other Rule 43 action plans, and that we would follow that format. So I was working to the brief of using the coroner's recommendations exactly as that. So that was the work I undertook.
I follow. Was there a sense in which you regarded this task, essentially taking on the version of the action plan, at least in respect of the 9 items, as something of a clean start?
Yes, it was very much so that the way this was going to be presented to ODCB was as the coroner's recommendations. I
see. Just panning out for a moment and asking a more general question, was there any thought given at the time to making a smoother transition from where you'd got to with Lindridge on the 34 actions pre-inquest and the Rule 43 actions as a result of the Rule 43 letter?
I'm not sure if any conversations were held by the CMB or the Commissioners Group. I wasn't made aware if there were any.
Right. So did nobody at the time take any of the 34 actions which remained relevant in light of the Rule 43 recommendations, see what had been done thus far, and therefore see whether that informed what needed further to be done in the light of the Rule 43 recommendations?
I wasn't aware if that happened.
Right. Why is that?
I'm not sure. That would have been a decision that would have been taken by CMB if that was to happen, I would think.
Yeah, and you'd know about it if it had been decided.
If it had been decided, it would have been given to me by Gary Reason. Yes.
Right. Okay. Well, let's see if that comes back later in the questions. But can we go to Max Disaniaki's statement, please? This is at LFB 000086249. And if we go to page 3, please, in that statement, let's look together at paragraph 13. It's at the bottom of page 3. He says, I compiled the action plan from reviewing the updated information provided to me by all the owners of action points, as listed in the relevant column of the action plan. The initial draft of the action plan was provided to me by Adrian Bevan, Head of Health and Safety. I believe the action plan was drafted for the Director of Operational Resilience and Training, Gary Reason. I was given existing material to work from. And then if we move to paragraph 15 on the next page, page 4, he says, the process of review of the action plan was that approximately 3 weeks prior to the board meeting, I would send a request for updated information to all owners of action points as listed in the relevant column of the action plan. And then if we look at paragraph 17 at the foot of page 4, he says, once the information had been collated, usually 1 or 2 weeks prior to the board meeting, I would review the amended document and, if necessary, refer to the owner of an action point for further information or clarification. Approximately 1 week before the ODCB meeting, I would send the amended action plan to Shireen Malcolm for distribution to the members of the ODCB by the agreed deadline, which was approximately 1 week prior to the board meeting. But first, what was your role in overseeing that work?
So looking at this, it seems quite complicated and confused, but basically Max worked directly to Dr. Adrian Bevan, who led the Health and Safety Department, and so that agreed format for using that information was something that had been going on for some time. Quite regularly, Gary Reason would be the one who would be assisting in updating various actions, and there would be direct communication between Adrian Bevan and Gary Reason. I would normally be copied in on the emails, but not necessarily be the one where the information was passing to and from.
Now, as Assistant Commissioner for Operational Assurance, did you ever challenge the updates that were received from the other departments? So, for example, where departments had not completed their actions in time or up to a satisfactory standard?
So if Group Manager Disniaki was having issues with getting information in a timely fashion, then I would send an email that would either come from myself or from David Archer requesting the updates. And if we still weren't getting any joy, then I would speak to Gary Reason, who would then email the other directors directly, as it were, for them to contact their heads.
Right. So your role as ACOA, if I can put it that way, was, is this right, to essentially ensure proper collation as opposed to quality assure it?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Now, what about in your capacity as a member of ODCB, by which I mean, did you, or as a member, or did the board in general ever challenge an update because, for example, the work was inadequate or incomplete?
Yes, the ODCB would challenge information in the updates, especially if somebody had information that they believed the update wasn't correct, or that there was missing information, or that it was ambiguous. Then there would be challenge provided.
Can you give us an example?
I'm trying to think of one where. So I think that the Deputy Commissioner was quite rigorous in her challenge quite regularly, and if she thought that somebody was being overly ambitious in what they'd stated, that so they thought work had been progressed further than it had, she would ask them to provide the evidence for that.
Could you give us an example of a
Not
specific?
No, sorry, I can't think of a specific one at this moment. If I were to look back at minutes and updates of those, I would possibly be able to find one.
Let's look then at the Lacknell House Working Group and the Strategy Committee and what I might call the Bevan Review. Gary Reason told us that the Lacknell House Working Group was established to provide political oversight, scrutiny and accountability of the LFB's responses to the Lacknell House fire, and he was responsible for providing the Lacknell House Working Group with regular monitoring reports, in other words, updates on the LFB's progress as against the Rule 43 action plan. That's what he told us. Do you agree?
Yes.
That is correct. Now, the first iteration of the Rule 43 monitoring report, as opposed to the action plan, is at LFB 000 67820. It's dated Monday, 30th of September 2013, and it's a note of a meeting, or item 1 is note of a meeting of the 28th of August 2013. If you go to page 11, we can see the monitoring report attached to this agenda. There it is, and it runs for a number of pages thereafter. It's a separate document, isn't it, as we've seen from the Rule 43 Consolidated Action Plan presented at the meeting?
Yes, it is.
Yes. Were the two updates, the updated action plan and the updated monitoring report, kept separate? Because, let me suggest a reason, because unlike the ODCB, the Lakanal House Working Group was focusing exclusively on the Lakanal Rule 43 recommendations.
That's correct.
And what was the ODCB focusing on as well?
That was focusing on the Rule 43 from Shirley Towers, where the 2 firefighters had lost their lives.
I follow. Gary Reason also told us that he would take your latest update to the ODCB and put that into the monitoring report for members, because, as he said, it was ostensibly exactly the same information, just in a slightly different format for members' consumption. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Now, let's look at your statement, your first witness statement, page 8, paragraph 28. You say there, at a meeting of the LFEPA Strategy Committee on 12th November 2013, Director Gary Reason introduced a report entitled Lakanal House Monitoring Report and Action Plan. And now we'll turn to that report in a moment. It's just a few months on from the first version of the monitoring report we've just seen. But let's stick first with the rest of your paragraph. You say this: having reviewed it, I note that that report is in my name because I was the head of the relevant department. However, it was drafted by the head of Health and Safety, Adrian Bevan. The report included an action plan monitoring report which was presented by Gary at regular meetings of the working group. Given that the report was going out in your name, did you check its contents?
I would have seen the report, but I very much relied on Dr. Adrian Bevan for completing the details, working very closely with Gary Reason.
I see. So what was your role, other than a conduit?
Merely as a conduit.
Merely as a conduit. What was the point of being a conduit? Why couldn't Gary Reason do that?
I think because the reports, the Rule 43 updates came through the Operational Assurance Department, I think it was just felt for it to line up that they would have it as a report in my name as Head of Operational Assurance.
But as Head of Operational Assurance, your domain was rather narrower, wasn't it, than the full width of the Rule 43 action plan and related reports?
Yes, but because the health and safety team were the ones who were responsible for providing the updates through GM Dany, that's how it came to be, I think.
I see. I think we're getting the picture of one of essentially functionality, but because of the system that you adopted from the Health and Safety Department, Max Dyseniaki, Adrian Bevan, it came through you.
Yes, that's right, to Gary Reason.
That may explain what I'm going to show you next. Can we go to LFB 000089095? This is an email dated the 3rd of October 2013 from Gary Reason to Max Dyseniaki and you, copy to Adrian Bevan, subject Authority Forward Programme, CCG4. And he talks about, and I think I can summarise it, preparation for the forthcoming 12th of November Strategy Committee and the dates by which things have to go in and to the CMB. And in the second paragraph, in the last half of it, he says it'll be for us to produce it and needs to be in the same format that I recently produced for the Lakanal House Member Working Group, LHWG. See attached copy of the action plan that we used for the LHWG earlier in the week. That was the September version. We saw the 30th of September date on the meeting notes, remember, and the version that was produced there. Then he says this: given the above, it's clear that we need to crack on with preparing the covering report so I get a chance to see it before the dispatch date for the CMB on the 17th. We also need to ensure that the updates to the wider Rule 43 are consistent in the Lacknell-specific update that goes to ODCB and the one I take to members through the LHWG. NB, members were very challenging regarding the Lacknell Rule 43, so it may be helpful if I give you some feedback on this before we submit the Rule 43 update to the next ODCB meeting. What feedback did Gary Reason give on that subject?
I don't recall specifically, and I'm not sure whether he gave the feedback directly to Max and Adrian, or whether I was including that. I don't recall.
How are the LFIPA members, quotes, very challenging, unquotes, as he says, in relation to the Lacknell Rule 43 actions?
So I think what he's referring to is the fact that, quite rightly, the members of LFIPA provided robust challenge to the officers who attended the Lacknell House Working Group to ensure that they were giving full and proper updates into the work that was being undertaken.
Now, as we touched on a moment ago, the drafting of the covering report was allocated to Adrian Bevan, as you told us, I think. Let's see what Adrian Bevan says in his statement about this. LFB 000890889. That's the first page of his statement there. 29th of January 2020 is his statement. And if we go to page 4, paragraph 17, he says this at 17 and 18. I'll read both to you. In October 2013, I was asked to draft the covering note of the monitoring report and action plan, which is contained at pages 1 to 3 of the exhibit, and which I will refer to as the covering note. In this statement, I will distinguish the covering note from the table contained in the appendix to the document, which I will refer to as the action plan. I was assigned the task of drafting the covering note by the Director of Operational Resilience and Training, Gary Reason, and AC Operational Assurance, Dany Cotton. As stated above, Dany Cotton was my immediate line manager at that time. I cannot recall the date when I began the task, but I have reviewed my calendar records, and I believe it may have been assigned to me at a meeting on 8th October 2013. Now, you can see that Mr. Bevan exhibits a calendar invite there, as he refers to. Let's look at it. It's at LFB 000899092. There it is, and you can see that Gary Reason sends the invitation to you, to Adrian Bevan, Max Disiniaki, and David Lindridge. Do you remember the meeting?
No, I don't recall. I'm sorry.
Have you any recollection or impression of a recollection of what was discussed at the meeting?
No, I'm not even sure from this whether I attended the meeting. That was a meeting invite, but I would have to be able to access my diary to see if I actually attended it.
Is there any reason why you wouldn't have done, apart from unexpected personal things?
If I'd been on leave, or if I'd been on an operational incident, or if I'd been already at a different scheduled meeting, then there could be a number of reasons.
Now, the finalised report to the Strategy Committee, which we saw referred to a little bit earlier for the 12th of November 2013 meeting, is at LFB 0008917. And if we go to page 1 of that, you can see what it is. Lacknell House Monitoring Report and Action Plan, so the two elements identified in the report title there. Date 12th November 2013, report by Assistant Commissioner Operational Assurance, that's you. As you say, you put your name to it. We've seen that from your statement. And if you look at the summary, it says, on 20th of June 2013, the authority was presented with a paper that discussed the outcomes from the coroner's inquest into the fire at Lacknell House on 3rd July 2009, in which 6 members of the public tragically lost their lives. That paper also described the actions that the Commissioner would take in response to the coroner's recommendations. At the authority meeting, it was agreed that implementation of the actions would be monitored at both officer level via the Operational Directorate's Coordination Board, ODCB, and via monitoring reports presented to meetings of the Strategy Committee. This report responds to the latter requirement for providing a regular update to the members of the Strategy Committee. So that was the plan, that's the idea. And if you go, please, to page 2, you can see paragraph 6 under the heading Progress Made Against the Action Plan. And paragraph 6 says, so that members can easily see whether progress of the plan deviates from the timescale commitments included in the Commissioner's response to the coroner, letter dated 23rd of May 2013 refers. And we've seen that in the evidence. The information has been colour-coded. Only one activity failed to be delivered by the target date, which relates to the establishment of the high-rise forum. Officers had intended to establish this new forum by the end of August, but due to the availability of the key stakeholders, the inaugural meeting was actually held on the 4th of October. Para 7. All other tasks are progressing in accordance with the agreed timescales or have been completed. Did you verify that information, particularly in paragraph 7, when you read through Dr. Bevan's draft?
No, because the information would have been that was taken from the Rule 43 action plan that would have been agreed by ODCB.
Well, we try it differently. This report is going out in your name, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
So when a statement was made by you or under your name to the strategy committee, did you check yourself and verify the truth of the statement? All other tasks are progressing in accordance with the agreed timescales or have been completed.
I was aware that Adrian Bevan and Max Dissanayake would have been working to the information that ODCB had ratified, which I would have been present at, so I would have been content that that information was correct. Right.
So the answer to my question is you did verify the information, did you, when you read through Dr. Bevan's report?
Only by the fact it was the same would correlate with information at ODCB. I didn't have to conduct an independent verification of this table, as it was a lift of the information from ODCB.
So you checked that it was the same as what ODCB was being told, and no more than that?
Yes, that'd be it.
Yes, I see. Now, it appears that the next information on which the Strategy Committee was updated about the work of the Lacknell House Working Group and the Rule 43 actions was in the 11th of July 2014 report to that committee, the Strategy Committee. Let's look at that, LFB 000067819. There it is on the screen, Lacknell House Working Group Strategy Committee meeting, 11th July 2014, report by Deputy Commissioner and Director of Operational Resilience and Training. So that's not you.
That's Gary Reason.
That's right. Why had there been a change?
I think because Gary Reason would actually have presented the report and because he was the one who was responsible for presenting all the information to the Lacknell House Working Group. I think he felt it was more appropriate that the reports were actually going in his name because he was essentially the responsible officer.
Even though the functional route to reporting to the Strategy Committee in late 2013, as we've seen, had been through you because of the origins of the data in the Health and Safety, or rather the origins of the formatting within the Health and Safety Department.
I think this is because at this time Gary Reason was working so closely with Dr. Adrian Bevan and Max Dissanayake on the updates of the report that he felt he had that oversight and therefore the report went in his name.
Right. At what point was the decision made that it should no longer be you who put the name to the report, but him and Rita Dexter?
I'm not sure. That would have been a decision they would have taken. I'm not sure when that was taken.
Right. But they didn't include you in that decision, did they?
No.
Or did they? They didn't. Right. And now, if we look, please, at the summary, you can see it says that it's the final update to the Strategy Committee detailing the work that has been initiated and progressed by the Lacknell House Working Group. Recommendations. 1, that the work of the Lacknell House Working Group be noted. 2, that this report be agreed as the formal conclusion of the work of the Lacknell House Working Group. Were you aware of that?
I think you're speaking quite quickly.
That's
Probably
me,
more
is it?
quickly than you think. So perhaps I think the stenographer's finding it difficult to follow.
All right, I'm sorry. I will slow down. I'll say it again so it can be got down properly. Recommendations. 1, that the work of the Lacknell House Working Group be noted. 2, that this report be agreed as the formal conclusion of the work of the Lacknell House Working Group. Now, were you aware that at this point in time, a number of the Rule 43 actions were incomplete?
I would have been aware of the updates that were going to ODCB, yes.
My question was, were you aware at this point in time, July 2014, that there were a number of Rule 43 actions that were incomplete?
Yes, I'm saying from the Rule 43 action plan that was going to ODCB, not from the Lacknell House Working Group, because I wasn't involved in that, but through my work with ODCB, yes.
Right. So the answer is yes.
Yes.
Did you tell Gary Reason that there were a number of outstanding items from the Rule 43 of Rule 43 actions?
Gary Reason was fully aware because he was a member of ODCB and had seen the Rule 43 action plan updates.
Did you know that Gary Reason nonetheless was telling the strategy committee that this was the formal conclusion of the Lakenhall House Working Group?
No, I wasn't aware of this.
Did you see this report before it went?
No, I wasn't party to the either being at the Commissioner's CMB or Strategy Committee, so I wouldn't have seen any of these papers.
Can I then turn to a different topic, which is incident command training? Now, I should say that in the course of examining this topic, we will come time and again, I think, to the action plan and the updates given to the ODCB. Let's look at LFB 34062. This is a document with which we examined with Gary Reason when he gave evidence, and this was referred to as the LFB's Rule 43 pro forma. Do you recognise this document?
I believe I was shown it. I don't recall taking part in filling it in. I think that was the comms department.
Right. When did you first see this document, do you think?
I don't recall. I have seen it in my preparations to come here, but I don't recall the time when I first saw it.
Do you think you saw it at the time, from April or May 2013?
I would be guessing. I don't remember. I would imagine I would have seen it, but I don't recall seeing it.
I think we can proceed, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, that this was an internal working document created in about April 2013 and intended to scope out potential ways in which the LFB could respond to the Lakenhall House Rule 43 recommendations.
Yes, I believe so.
You think so? Now, the incident command section of this document starts at page 11. Can we please go to page 11? Now, there is the subject, incident commanders, and you can see the box arrangements there. Before we look at the detail, let me ask you this. Gary Reason told us that you were the head of service responsible for the response to the coroner's incident command recommendations. Is that right?
That's correct.
And therefore you were responsible for the content of this part of this document.
Interestingly, I was responsible for Part B, definitely. Part A was undertaken, was a piece of work that was being done by AC Dave Brown in conjunction with the Operational Policy Department, because the wider document that talked about attendance at operational incidents was subject to operational policy owned that, but it was a larger piece of work that Dave Brown was also working with the Fire Brigades Union on about the changes in officer level. So Section B was mine, but Dave Brown and OP were doing Section A.
Now, I'd like to focus on the second recommendation there, which is B, which you yourself pointed out. Let's just look at that. It says, it is also recommended that consideration be given to training of ICs and potential ICs to enhance their performance in relation to the following. And then there are 7 incident command topics. I'll read them to you, although we can find them in the Rule 43 letter itself, but it's worth just reminding ourselves of what they are. 1, use of the dynamic risk management model and other management tools to enable ICs to analyse the situation and to recognise and react quickly to changing circumstances. 2, to recognise when to escalate attendance by more experienced ICs. 3, to anticipate that a fire might behave in a manner inconsistent with the compartmentation principle. 4, to be aware of the risks to those above and adjacent to the fire flat. 5, handover from one IC to the next and effective deployment of outgoing ICs. 6, the collection of information from all possible sources. 7, use of methodical search patterns. Now, when you first saw this, whenever that was, did you think that there was anything unclear or confusing about any of those recommendations?
No.
No. Let's go to see what Ron Dobson told the coroner about incident command and some of these recommendations. Can we please go to pages 13 to 17 of this self-same document, which sets that out? Now, I'm not going to read this all to you, but can I take it that you're familiar with this part of the document? This is Commissioner Ron Dobson's evidence to the inquest in answer to questions asked by Mr. James Maxwell Scott.
Yes, I've seen this.
Yes. And if we go to page 19, I think we can pick it up. Just scrolling down page 19. At what is said, there's a lot of it, runs over to page 20 and 21. If we just scroll gently through that. This is about embedding the performance review of command, notification of monitoring an incident, the role of an ORT officer at incidents, and the CARDA. And then if we go to page 21, we can see more of the same. And then at page 22, we can see on page 22 the two items A and B, which are the proposals to address everything that had come out of the inquest. You've referred to A. Just looking at B, it says this: the LFB will engage with our training contractor to ensure the points specifically listed in recommendations 1 to 7 are addressed in the current review process of incident command training. This work will aim to ensure that the training provided enhances performance across the range of required skills and knowledge needed to support effective incident command. The Brigade will also introduce a case study which will incorporate the learning outcomes from Lacknell House and from other high-profile, high-rise incidents such as Shirley Towers, Hampshire, and Harrow Court, Hertfordshire. Now, Gary Reason told us that proposal was put together by you and your incident management training team, and that you would have, I think is how he put it, have been comfortable with those proposals before they were presented to the Commissioner, to the Deputy Commissioner Rita Dexter, and the various directors. That's what he said at day 180, page 169, line 25 to 170, line 5. Do you agree?
Yes.
That being so, how did you arrive at that training proposal, the one identified in B?
That was a result of a conversation with other senior operational colleagues and with James Dalgleish, who was in charge of HR and training, and with Gary Reason about the best way forward to address the issue.
Right. Were there formal meetings at which that was discussed and minuted?
I believe that was discussed at our Directorate Management Board meetings, which Gary Reason would chair, where Peter Cowup from Operational Policy and James Dalgleish and Graham Ellis would be there as well. So it would be colleagues who would have the relevant information.
Right. Did you yourself have, do you recall, specific input into that wording, the language I read to you in B?
I don't recall, but I think the other person who was heavily involved in this was DAC Tim Cutbill, who had been the LFB lead for the investigation into Lacknell House and the work throughout with the coroner's inquest. He was the one who had the detailed information, so I know that he was working very closely on a lot of these recommendations as well. So I don't recall the specifics of how the wording came to be, but I believe those people were involved in it, and I know that DAC Cutbill had a lot of involvement with that.
Yes, and in that connection then, let me just show you a document to fix it in your mind and that of others. LFB 3091864, please. This is an email from you to Graham Ellis, Adrian Bevan and Michael Curran, the 19th of April 2013. And if we go to the text of it, you can see it starts, "Hi folks, I attended the meeting below about the Rule 43 from Lacknell, and we have been given a piece of work to do to respond to the leadership element. I had a quick chat with Graham yesterday, but ideally I would like to meet with all of us on Wednesday if everyone is free. I'm awaiting some further info from Tim Cutbill, including the Commissioner's statement and the detailed questions that the Commissioner wants answering. But to give you an early heads up, we need a draft response by first week of May. And if you look down the screen, you can see that this tops an email, or overtops an email from Tim Cutbill to you, among others. You can see that, of the 16th of April, attaching the Rule 43 and a proposal for discussion about how you might organise the response. That's what he sent you. Does that email chain, so far as I've read it to you, assist you in your recollection of your involvement?
Yes, it does.
Yes. Now, then let's move on in time a little bit to May 2013. Can we please go to LFB 000855356? This is an email of the 3rd of May 2013. If we can have that expanded, please. It's not terribly easy to see, but it says, it's from you, 3rd of May 2013, to Gary Rees and Steve Turek and Dave Brown and James Knighton, pro forma for Rule 43 responses, Incident Command Response DC. Can you see that?
Yes.
Oh, great, I agree.
I'm
And it says,
squinting.
hi folks, please find attached OA's first draft of the response to the Rule 43 for today's meeting. Very much a work in progress. We have included the relevant parts of both the Commissioner's written and verbal submissions for reference. Thanks, Dany. Does that tell us? I can show you the attachment. Perhaps I should show you the attachment before I ask my question. It's at LFB 3085357. And you can see the first page of the attachment there. And if you scroll down over the next few pages, you'll see the outtake from the transcript of the inquest, Ron Dobson's evidence. And then if you go to page 7, you can see the current position. And then you've got in the box, with regard to Part B of the recommendations, the 7 recommendations there. And then if you go to page 9, you can see the proposal under A, little a. We propose to address the Rule 43 recommendations by the following actions. And you can see the text. Was that drafted by you, given the email I've shown you which covered it?
So, probably not, because that was the issue I was referred to earlier in relation to Dave Brown and operational policy about the changing of officer level thresholds. If it goes on to section B, then if I could see that.
Well, it does go on page 10, if we could turn the page.
Thank you.
To cover, in the 4th line, a planned review of training provided for officers in the areas listed in B1 to 7 to ensure that the appropriate training is provided and assessment of competence in these areas. And then it goes on to say we're proposing to introduce a case study which will incorporate the learning outcomes not only from Lacknell House but also Shirley Towers and Harrow Court, etc. That looks like your area.
Yeah, so I think this response here would have been a combined response from a number of departments.
Yeah, but looking at that text, if nothing else in this document, and the covering email of the 3rd of May 2013, can we take it that you were involved yourself in the drafting of some elements of the Rule 43 action plan?
Yes, I was.
Yes, at least in respect of B, and then in respect we've seen. Thank you. Now, can we then turn, against that background, to the next thing, which is the Lacknell House case study, which came to fruition as such through something called TCAP 0153. And I want to ask you about that. Can we please go to that TCAP at LFB 000067857? This is the first page of 0153. And if we go to page, well, you can see the title is Lacknell Training Case Study. And if we go to page 4, please, of that TCAP form, we can see the title, Lacanal Training Case Study, and then under paragraph 1.2, name of commissioning officer and their department, AC Cotton Operational Assurance. And Dave Brown is the client, as you can see from the next paragraph, yes?
Correct.
Now, in Module 5 of this inquiry, Peter Groves told us that the commissioning department would have primary responsibility for the training package and its training needs and learning objectives. Is that, pausing there, is that correct?
In the main, it's correct. I think there was a slight difference in the case of the two TCAPs relating to Lacanal, because although, and I think as Pete Cowart mentioned as well, although a name of the commissioning department officer will be put on there, the detail of it is normally completed by somebody else. And in this case, the lead officer was DAC Tim Cutbill, because of his involvement in the Lacanal investigation and his involvement throughout the process. He was the most detailed officer and the subject matter expert right across the case for Lacanal. So this was something that he was involved in commissioning and involved throughout, and in fact subsequently was the person who produced and delivered all of the senior officer aspect of this training package.
Now, to be fair to you, it was indeed AC Tim Cutbill who signed this off in May 2016, in fact. We can see that later in the document. We'll come to that. But on the basis of what we see on page 4, it looks like you were the commissioning officer.
Yeah, that's another thing of a name only. Yes, it was my department, and indeed Group Manager Mike Curran, who had also worked with Tim Cutbill closely on the Lacanal House investigation, who was then had returned and was working in health and safety, worked alongside Tim Cutbill and others on the development of this package.
Right. You say in name only. Did you, as the commissioning officer identified as such on this page, have any involvement in the development of this TCAP?
No, I didn't.
Could you just explain why that is, given that it is your department that was the commissioning officer, or rather the commissioning department?
Yes, because operational assurance was given the role of the commissioning department, because these were aspects in relation to incident command which clearly came into my department, but because DAC Tim Cutbill was the very much agreed subject matter expert and had been working directly to the Commissioner Ron Dobson on this issue, it was agreed at a very early stage that he would be the one that would be the lead authority, subject matter expert, and responsible for the development of this package.
Right. Subject matter expert, I understand, but would it not be necessary for your department as the commissioning department and you as the commissioning officer nonetheless to keep oversight, supervisional responsibility for the development of this TCAP?
So the oversight was conducted by the liaison between Tim Cutbill and Mike Curran. The fact that it was such a very specific subject on a case study around Lacanal, it was decided that Tim Cutbill, who was also a very senior officer, would be the one who would be leading on this.
To whom was Tim Cutbill responsible in his line of reporting in respect of this TCAP?
Gary Reason.
And Gary Reason to, I suppose, the commissioning group?
Gary Reason, well,
CMB.
Gary Reason, Commissioner and CMB, yes.
So does that mean that you were not in the reporting line at all in respect of this TCAP?
So assistant commissioners weren't generally in the reporting line of TCAPs. Once a commissioning department and the officer, once this TCAP had been completed, there would then be a dedicated group of people involved in that, including people from the commissioning department, but then working very closely with the learning and development team, Nick Markwell's team, and then the team from the Babcock's, the external training provider. So those people working together on the development of the package. I was aware of updates, clearly, because Tim Cutbill brought those to the Directorate Management Board, because we were in the same directorate. So I was aware of the progress it was making, and sometimes frustratingly slow progress. But I was not the person who had the day-to-day oversight of it. And in fact, assistant commissioners didn't have day-to-day oversights of TCAPs.
Right. So just to see if I can draw the threads together on where we are so far. Neither you as the commissioning officer nor your department as the commissioning department were in the line of supervision of the development of this TCAP.
Members of my department were, yes.
Members of your department were.
Yes, absolutely.
But those members of your department, including Tim Cutbill, reported out of your department in respect of it.
So sorry, Tim Cutbill wasn't in my department. He was in my directorate. Sorry, it's very confusing.
Right, okay.
So Gary Reason was our director in charge of us. A number of us sat underneath him in our departments, including myself and Tim Cutbill and Peter Cowart and Peter Groves and James Dalgleish. We all sat underneath Gary. So Tim would report into Gary as his line manager. I would report to Gary as my line manager.
Yes. So coming back to the words of the document,
yes,
I think I'm right, aren't I, that all members of your directorate would report in respect of this development of this, but not your department?
No, some members of my department were directly involved as part of the stakeholder group developing this package. So Mike Curran, who worked for Dr. Adrian Bevan, therefore for me, was in the stakeholder group.
But they didn't report up the department, they reported out of the department.
So in the development of TCAPs, people didn't report through into the top of the commissioning board. It's quite complex, quite difficult to explain this process because I found it endlessly frustrating myself trying to understand and get to grips with the TCAP process. It was a very, I think, unnecessary, burdensome and complex process to develop training. That involved a number of different people at different times. So there wasn't a situation where you would sit down and have a commissioning department's discussion around that TCAP. That wasn't the process that happened. So it would be then on to the management of the learning and management strategy and people in that team to manage the ongoing progression of the TCAP until it was developed into a product which would then be reviewed and ultimately signed off.
But not signed off by you?
No, this was signed off by AC Tim Cutbill.
It was, but not you, even though you were the commissioning officer?
No, this was an anomaly with this specific TCAP because of the nature of it.
Right. Let's try Dave Brown, AC Brown. He's the client and his department is APR, as we can see. What was his role, can you tell us, in the any input into the content of this document or its oversight and supervision?
The same, he wouldn't have had any, he was just the client for it, but he had a member of his team who I believe was Deputy Assistant Commissioner Adrian Fenton, who was involved in the stakeholder meetings around this subject.
Right. Now, well, let's see how we go with the document against that background. If we can go, please, to page 4. At the bottom of the page, you can see section 1.6, which has now come into view. Background context. It says, members of the public lost their lives at Lacknell House incident. This was subject to detailed investigations and recommendations under Rule 43 of the Coroner's Rules. And then if you turn the page, please, to page 5, the particular importance of applying policy and training appropriately at this type of incident has been highlighted by these investigations. The learning outcomes from this incident needs to be shared with operational staff to inform and influence their approach dealing with this type of incident. The LFB is seeking a training case study that focuses on the learning outcomes listed in section 4.1, with the coroner's 7 recommendations considered throughout the training as they also relate to the learning outcomes. As mentioned, the purpose and main objective of this TCAP is to share the learning outcomes from the Lacknell incident, not to develop another high-rise training pack. This training must be consistent with existing training and policy and signpost existing training and policy where relevant. What was meant? Well, let me ask you a prior question. When this document was created, apparently in your name, did you see it?
No, I don't believe I did.
Don't believe you did. Would it be normal for the commissioning officer and the commissioning officer's department not even to see a TCAP in this form?
I would say quite normal for the commissioning officer not to see it, but not for the commissioning officer's department not to be involved. And I saw, as you scrolled down there, that there were 2 people in my department who were involved in this.
When I scrolled down, I'm not sure what I scrolled down past, but maybe page 4, if we go back to it, where you see a list under paragraph 1.4 of the stakeholder group members. We've got Tim Cutbill and Nick Markwell, Adrian Bevan.
And then you have Neil Withers as well, who was the Graham Ellis's deputy in Incident Command.
I see. Can you help us nonetheless, even though this document appears to be fairly alien to you, but can you help us with what was meant by the intention to share the learning outcomes from the Lacanal incident?
Exactly that the purpose of this was to have a training package that was focused on Lacanal and the outcomes, and therefore the coroner's recommendations from that incident.
Right. Was it in your mind at the time, when you say that the training package was to be focused on Lacanal, that it would tell the story, even by way of an abbreviated timeline, of what actually happened at the incident?
Yes, that was the idea.
That was the idea, was it? Now, we've seen the coroner's Rule 43 recommendation containing 7 specific areas where incident command training could be improved. Do you know why it was that the training package didn't seek to make those improvements, but was tied instead to existing training and policies?
I don't believe it was.
Well, if we look over back at page 5, help me with the... And maybe you can't, given your relative unfamiliarity with it, but in the 3rd paragraph, in the last sentence, it says, this training must be consistent with existing training and policy, and signpost existing training and policy where relevant. Why?
Because we had an existing high-rise policy, an existing policy on a number of other, which I think you'll find are listed below. And what that means simply is that the relevant policies and procedures must be followed in this training package, not that it is simply to deliver a training package on those. It's to deliver it on Lacanal, but ensuring the high-rise policy, that the on-arrival tactics policy, the dynamic risk assessment policy are all adhered to within that, because those were existing policies for London Fire Brigade.
Why was it necessary for the training, the new training, which was to learn the lessons in those 7 respects, to be consistent with existing training and policy?
Because if we didn't make it consistent with existing policy, then we would be confusing all of our incident commanders who are trained to the existing London Fire Brigade policies. If we went outside of that policy and told them to do something different, they would quite rightly question that, because we have an existing suite of operational policies.
Well, I have to say I find that a little puzzling, because one conclusion might have been that the existing policies were not adequate.
And you're right, sir, but I think what this intended to do, the intention of this, was that it would describe the Lacanal house fire step by step with what happened, and then make reference to the policies. And I think potentially, I know a number of the policies have been reviewed, and I know you've been in detail through a number of those. I think sometimes it's not the policy that's at fault, it's the application of the policy, or potentially the understanding of the policy. And by having a case study, I think that the vast majority of firefighters really understand a case study, because you have a picture, you have a building, you build a story up, and then you build the training into that story. So it's a real life experience, as opposed to just sitting down with a list of things that you have to adhere to. It kind of combines them in a real life experience for them.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
On the language as it stands in this TCAP, though, was there not the risk that consistency with existing training and policy would be prioritised over development of policy and training as recommended?
No, I don't believe so, because this was such a specific subject matter, Lacanal House, that we'd obviously had such detail on, that the focus of this training package was to relate the story of the Lacanal House fire.
Now, the learning outcomes that are referred to in the background text, I think, appear at page 9 of this document. If we can go to that, please. And we see there that, again, the outcomes are listed at 1 to 7, verbatim. And do you agree that that would suggest that the case study was intended to address each of those recommendations?
Yes, definitely.
Yes. And how would the package provide meaningful improvements in those 7 areas if the TCAP had to be consistent with existing training, given there might be a risk that they were contradictory?
So none of those issues listed in 1 to 7 were in any way contradictory to existing London Fire Brigade policy and procedures. They were all a part of the existing suite of policy and procedures we had. And the idea of the Lacanal case study was to go through step by step the progression of the fire at Lacanal, and then to break and have conversations with the people that were being trained together, whether that was senior officers or fire station watch-based staff, about the specific issues in there in relation to how they related to Lacanal House.
I see. So at this point, 2013, the aim was, as you've just put it, to go through step by step the progression of the fire at Lacanal, and then to break and have conversations.
Yes, that's the idea. And then that enabled discussion. So, for instance, you would break and say, at this point, the watch manager was being given information from a member of the public, from here and from there. How would you collate that information? How would you share that information? How would you make sure you're getting the best out of it? That kind of thing. So it would be that discussion point then where people could then chip in and have a conversation about that.
It looks from this document that somebody has essentially cut and pasted as learning outcomes the 7 recommendations.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. Can you just help me? Did anybody actually sit down and work out what trainees would have to learn in order to achieve, for example, 5, handover, or 6, collection of information from all possible sources, or 7, use of methodical search patterns?
I believe that I've seen a document that is actually a table where these 7 items are taken and then they are mapped against current policy and what both firefighters and officers would need to do to understand that.
The reason I asked the question in the way I did was because items 1 to 4 are outcomes. They are things that you would expect you would train someone to do. Use, recognise, anticipate, be aware. But 5, 6 and 7 aren't outcomes. They're just functions, aren't they?
I think the reason they're worded like that is to be very specific and not dilute the intent of the coroner in the recommendations she made. So to make it explicit that those were the outcomes required from the training. And I think if you reword them, you potentially risk losing the essence of what they were at that time, I believe.
Well, sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Miller, but I have difficulty in understanding the approach of the LFB to coroner's recommendation number 2, which is all concerned with the experience of the incident commander. And I don't have her words on the screen and I can't remember them specifically, but I think what she recommended was that the LFB give consideration to the way in which incident command moves from one officer to another, really strictly in accordance with seniority at the scene or the number of fire appliances sent to the scene. Now, I'm not sure that this formulation actually addresses her concern, and the answer to her concern may have been we've got the best system we could have anyway.
And I think, sir, from recollection, that the Commissioner's response was that there were a number of steps in place that London Fire Brigade believed addressed that, and also the addition of changing the thresholds of command. So instead of there being such a rapid handover because it changed at 4 pumps, 6 pumps, 8 pumps, to actually increase the gap between them so that officers were responsible for a greater number of fire appliances, reducing that handover process.
But simply cutting and pasting parts of the coroner's letter into this document doesn't necessarily address the point that she was trying to get at, does it?
No, I agree with that, sir.
All right, thank you. Yes, Mr. Bennett, sorry to interrupt you.
No, thank you. Now, we also heard from Peter Groves when he gave evidence that the commissioning department would have been, I think is what he said, involved in the development of a training package and its content. and would ultimately be required to sign off that content before it's released. Do you agree with that?
In the normal run of events, yes, I said, and this one was slightly different in that AC Tim Cutbill was the one who was very heavily responsible for the development of it.
Right, so in the normal run of events, you would have been the person responsible for signing off this TCAP.
Yes, I would have been.
But in this case, it didn't happen. It was Tim Cutbill for the reasons you've explained.
Yes.
Is it right that the training which was developed under this TCAP consisted of a CBT study package for those ranked firefighter up to watch manager, and for those ranked station manager and above, a half-day case study facilitation delivered by way of a presentation from AC Cutbill?
Yes,
Cutbill, I think he was.
Sorry. The CBT package was an interactive video presentation where the video played of the progression of the fire at Lacanal. There were voiceovers from the incident commanders who had been actually at Lacanal relaying information about what they were told at the time, what they'd seen, and then there were the video would then pause once all the information had been, and then there were some questions posed about what would you do with this information. Could you now do a line drawing to demonstrate what the information you've been given is? So it was a combination. So when I say it was CBT package, it was a very interactive video package that involved directly the incident commanders who had been there at the Lacanal fire.
When you say it was very interactive, could you just explain what you mean by that a bit?
Well, in that it wasn't just... sometimes CBT packages were... what do you call them? Video... I can't think of the word, like not cartoons, but, they were images. They weren't real people. These were the real people who had been involved in Lacanal, who were giving a voiceover to the real fire that was happening. So they played timed slots of the fire developing, and they stopped it and demonstrated. So it was actually the real building that was on fire with real timelines of it, and the actual incident commanders relaying the story of what happened to them, and then stopping it to be able to pose the questions for staff to discuss various aspects of it.
We'll look at it in a moment. Before we do, can I just ask you, it's right, I think, from what you've told us, that even though this was an interactive CBT package, crew managers and watch managers only received that and didn't get any teacher-led training.
They had a trainer's guide that came with it that was quite a comprehensive document for them to follow as they went along. They didn't receive any additional one-to-one sort of training for it. No.
Do you know who decided that they should have interactive CBT as opposed to trainer-led presentations?
I don't know. I imagine that would have been a decision reached potentially by the group who put the package together. I wasn't aware of that.
Given the apparent importance of this training in order to carry out the recommendations of the Lacanal coroner, do you know what the rationale for the training being in the form it was as opposed to teacher-led?
So I'm not 100% sure, but knowing what I know about delivering training, so bearing in mind there are 440 different workplaces that the training would need to be delivered in. To have delivered that as a trainer-led training would have been very resource-intensive, very time-consuming, and would have taken far longer to roll out that training programme to those individual watches, whereas a CBT can be sent out as a package which they can then all access immediately. It wouldn't be dependent on having a trainer arrive at their place of work to deliver the training to them, or getting them together at one venue to see the training.
Given that crew managers and watch managers were invariably first responders at a fire and would have to make decisions very quickly if the fire developed beyond the compartment of origin or there was a sudden impending growth of fire, why is it that they only got computer-based training?
I wouldn't say it's an only computer-based training. It was a very comprehensive, and interactive, and received very good feedback from the crews. They like the visualisation of being able to see an incident and hear the people talking about it. As I said, that would have been the same issue. I believe that from crew manager up to senior officers. This was approximately 1,700 people that needed this training as officers. So to be able to do that with trainer-led training would have caused a further delay in being able to get the training out to the individuals.
Now let's look at the training guide for station-based staff issued by Babcock in August 2014. BAB 6073, please. Now, first you can see at the very foot of the page the date of 22nd of August 2014, and you can see at the top of the page that it's called Training Guide, Station-Based Training, and then it in the box, Lakanal House Case Study. Yes?
Yes.
Do you agree? Well, are you familiar with this document?
I've seen it in preparation for coming to give evidence. I didn't see it at the time.
You didn't see it at the time?
No, I didn't.
Do you agree, as a document point, that the training guide covers the key interactive slides from the CBT package, but not the slides which contain the videos or graphics which explain the full factual narrative of the Lakanal incident?
Yes.
Yes. And those 95 slides, for your reference, members of the panel, are at BAB 6045. Can I just ask you whether those 95 slides in the full CBT package were ever presented to station-based staff?
I believe so, but I couldn't confirm that. I'm not aware.
Now, if we look at page 7 of this document, this relates to Section 72D, visits and information gathering. And if you look at the question at page 7, you've got task 1. As task 1 is, there's a graphic there, I think, but there's also things to consider, and then policy 800, information gathering and contingency plans. And then if you move to page 8, it asks questions on the purpose of section 72D. As you can see, there's the question. And page 9, question, what information can you gather and record that would be relevant to crews attending an incident like this? And there are some PRA sheets at Appendix 3. And then page 10, you look at that, asks delegates the question, what actions would you take if you discover building defects? How is this information shared? And there are some sections identified from Policy 800. And then if you look at pages 11 and 12, there's further discussion or points for a group discussion on 72D visits. It's headed Things to Consider and Further Discussion. 72D visits are a legal requirement. Who do you think is responsible for carrying out 72D visits, etc.? Do the 72D visits you carry out serve any other purpose? These visits should be used to gather information on risks to firefighters, hazards beyond normal expectation, or those that are less obvious, control measures, tactical plans. And then for visits at high-rise premises, do you consider fixed installations, floors, floor numbers, layout of the flats, where the door numbers are, flat entrances and escape routes? How are these best documented? So you can see those there. Now, just pausing there, it looks as if this training on information was simply to remind trainees what the statutory obligation was under the 2004 Act and the contents of Policy 800, but not much more than that.
I think potentially the area that says for visits at high-rise premises, do you consider, and that was in relation to the fact that the layout of the flats at Lakanal House was a complicated scissor layout and was not necessarily as you would see it. You wouldn't necessarily expect the flats to be laid out like that. So, and talking about the flat entrances and escape routes, obviously one of the issues at Lakanal House was understanding the fact that there was an escape balcony at the back of all the premises that wasn't clearly understood. So I think that those are made reference to specifically because of the Lakanal House fire. Right.
I mean, just on what I've shown you at pages 8, 9 and 10, and I appreciate it is just a selection, from a relatively long document, a 23-page document. But this looks just like a refresher course on the legal requirements and the LFB policies in this respect. There's no link across to the Lacknell House incident itself.
So I think that if you, and I don't know because I couldn't get access to it, I think if you watched the video and they talked about the complexities and understanding the layouts of the floors, that would then lead to that conversation around the fact that you need to understand where the flat entrances are, which floors they're on, and that kind of thing. I think that's why that they are talking about those issues. And it is part of the Lacknell House case study, so there would be that understanding that those were the issues. And I'm sure that the voiceover from the initial crews and the crew manager and watch manager would discuss the complications of understanding what floors were and missing floors numbers and that kind of issue when you're trying to identify where you're going.
Was there any study of the ways in which information about Lacknell House specifically had been obtained by the LFB and in which way it was defective and could be improved on for the future?
I don't remember, but it would have been looked at because they would have considered what information London Fire Brigade had in relation to Lacknell House before the fire.
I'm slightly struggling with this training guide, not least because we can't see anything in it that innovates or identifies the mistakes at Lacknell which should be cured. Can you help us with that?
I think you would need to see the video and the voiceovers to understand, because I think that's where it says, do you consider? And those were some of the areas that were identified as issues. So when you're talking about the door numbers and the layout of the flats and the floors and things, those were some of the areas of confusion at Lacknell. So I think that does relate to them. But as I say, I wouldn't be able to do that without having seen the video and listened to the voiceovers.
Right. In general terms, I mean, you've presumably seen the videos and heard the voiceovers yourself?
No, I haven't seen them.
You haven't?
No, I've seen the script of the audio inputs, so the document that's got, and it wasn't a complete script, it was an early version of it, that's got a script of some of the audio inputs that talks about the initial incident commanders and them talking about the incident. Right.
So when you say you have to see the whole package, of course one would, naturally.
Yes.
But you haven't seen the whole thing?
No, I haven't, no.
Right. Now, take it from me that this training, at least this document, which is the analysis training guide, doesn't cover the identification of or treatment of external panels, facades or modern methods of construction during a 7.2D visit. Do you know why that is?
No, I don't.
And more generally, there's nothing in this training on external flame spread either. Do you know why that is?
No, I presume, though I don't know, I think from anything that it's played in the video, because obviously it demonstrates external flame spread, and that would then be a subject to a conversation, but I can't see it in this document, no.
No. And do you agree that external flame spread was considered to be one of the factors that made Lacknell House such a significant incident?
Yes, it was.
It was a factor in the fire, I think, wasn't it?
Yes, the fire loading of the flat of origin, which was a significant fire loading, the weather on the day, the coanda effect of keeping the heat and flames close to the building, open windows because it was summer, and high wind on the day, all combined to make it, very rapid external fire spread.
Yes, and given that external fire spread was one of the factors that made Lacknell such a significant incident, are you able to explain why that significant factor was not part of the training package designed to educate officers on it?
I'm not sure that it wasn't. I haven't, without being able to see the video and the voiceover, I couldn't say whether it was or wasn't in there.
Right. Well, there's nothing in this document on it. So using that as a basic departure point, can you explain why that factor doesn't appear in this document?
No, as I say, I wasn't part of the team that put this together, so sorry, I can't help with that.
There's nothing in this training package, at least in relation to this document, on the Dynamic Risk Management Model, or DMM, or on fires behaving in a way inconsistent with the compartmentation model, which were two of the 7 topics identified by the coroner. Do you know why they were omitted from this document?
I believe on an earlier slide you showed me the DMM was there, the one you showed me early on with the picture of building, a small building on the left-hand side, I think.
I think that might have been page 7.
Sorry, could you show me that again? Nope, there was another one that actually had the DMM. I'm not sure, we've looked at a number of documents, but there was a view of the DMM at one point. So I can't remember which document we were just looking at, but I don't know, without being able to see the rest of the thing, I'll take your word that it's not in there, but, and no, I don't know why.
Well, I don't want to mislead you about the content of the document. I'm trying to work out what it was that you might have seen.
Sorry, there was something where it wasn't in bold. It was a kind of lighter colour underneath something we were just looking at, but it might not have been this training guide. It might have been it was something to do with a case study. We've looked at a number of documents. Sorry, I'm
Yes, I can understand that.
document confused.
Fires behaving in a way inconsistent with the compartmentation principle, then taking that one, can you explain why that isn't covered in this training package?
So I believe it is covered in the narrative. I believe that there is a conversation around the fire spread through grills and vents and spreading from through flats because their alterations have been made. I'm sure that's covered in the voiceover. It might not be. I think this analysis training guide doesn't give you a full picture of what's in the actual package itself.
Right. Now, when you say the actual package, you mean the 95 slides?
Yes.
With the voiceover, I see.
Yes, and I have to say I have not seen sight of the 95 slides, sorry.
I understand that, but given, perhaps you can't help me with this, but given the importance of things like external flame spread, fire behaviour inconsistent with the compartmentation principle, why are they not in this document, which is the training guide, which one would have thought was the more important document, rather than being buried away in 95 pages of slides?
I'm not sure. Yes, they are very relevant. They're very important points.
I mean, on the face of this document, do you accept that this case study, on the face of this document, and making all allowances for what you say about the 95 slides, doesn't properly disseminate key lessons from the Lakanal incident to those officers most likely to need training as incident commanders, namely crew managers and watch managers?
On the face of this document, absolutely, but I do believe there is further information in the presentation itself.
Let's then turn to the station-based training, and Mr. Chairman, that's probably a convenient moment for the break.
Yes, well, I think it probably is. So we'll have a break now, Ms. Cotton. We'll come back, please, at 25 to 4. And again, I have to ask you not to talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room.
Of course.
All right? You'd like to give the usher then, please. Thank you very much. 25 to 4, please. Would you ask Mr. Cotton to come back in, please? Thank you. All right, ready,
Yes, sir.
ready to go on? Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Bennett.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. We've looked at the station-based training. I'd like now, please, to look at the training guide for the senior officers at LFB 000300044. As you can see from the foot of the screen, this is also dated the 22nd of August 2014. This is also called Lacknell House Case Study, and as you can see from the top of the screen, it says Senior Officer Training. If you turn to page 7, the interactive slides start and run through to page 12. On page 7, you can see there is the topic of 72D addressed, as conducted by lower rank officers. And on page 8, it focuses on assessing and prioritising information as an incident commander. 9, identifying flats and how line drawings might help. And on that you can see specific flats, 4 specific flats at Lacknell, 57, 68, 79 and 80. And then at page 11, you've got questions about relocation of the bridgehead and implementing and communicating the plan. And at page 12, questions on search and rescue methods. As with the package for station-based personnel, we've seen no mention of external flame spread, facades, compartmentation, or the dynamic risk management model. Again, do you accept that, going on the basis of this document at least, it failed to disseminate key lessons from the Lacknell House to senior staff?
I can see now where I was referring previously to the DMM. It's on the left-hand side on the slide at the bottom. It's underneath the writing there. So
Yes.
I'm presuming by the fact that that's included, that and on every one of those slides, that it makes reference to that when the conversation, this presentation was led by DAC Tim Cutbill. He was the one who delivered this training to senior officers. So I'm presuming, and I'm only presuming, that the reason that is there is because that was referenced throughout the presentation.
I see. And I follow. So are you referring to the coloured boxes?
Yes,
the arrows?
yes. Underneath the drawing of the building, there's a second box, which I'm sorry I can't read the detail of from here, but there are coloured boxes which I believe to be an illustration of the decision-making model.
I see. Let's just try that a little bit more then. Can we go to page 7? The difficulty, I think, is with this, is we can't blow it up. But if we go to page 7, you can see there's the same multicoloured box and arrow graphic on the left-hand side there under Analysis Section 1. Can you see?
Yes, I can.
And if you go to page 8, the same. It seems to be underlying some text.
Yes, I would imagine, and as I say, I am only imagining that as one of those boxes is information about the incident, information gathering, that would be the context in which that would be discussed, because this is talking about information, then how you deal with that information. So when it says about how do you balance discrepancies between the information, the situation, and that's all part of the decision-making model. So I would imagine, and I'm sorry to say, I don't know this as a fact, that's what that was there for as a reference point.
I mean, it certainly looks, on the face of it, would you agree, that the decision-making model, if that's what it is lurking obscurely beneath the surface of other text?
Yes, I wouldn't describe it as lurking, but it would be something that everyone was familiar with. So by having it lurking, it would be in people's minds because they would be familiar with the decision-making model.
Why not just spell it out on the face of one of the slides and say, this is the decision-making model, here it is, this is how you operate it in the context of Lacknell? I'm
not sure, and forgive me, I'm not sure if you played the slide show whether it would then bring the decision-making model to the fore when you were discussing that point. It's very hard to see when all you have is a kind of listed training guide in front of you.
Yes, I understand that. Now, we heard from Gary Reason that the training package was launched for station-based staff in August 2014, as the date rather signifies, but the final sign-off for the TCAP, which we've looked at earlier, only took place in May 2016, when you were Director for Safety and Assurance. Do you remember that?
No, I don't. I have seen that as part of the documents I've seen to prepare myself for this. It seems like a terribly long period of time when the training started in 2014. I'm not sure about that, why that date's included.
It indeed. Let's just nail the date down to the document. Can we go back to the TCAP form, please, at LFB 000067857? And if we go to page 37 in that document, you'll see the sign-off page. There's AC cut bill.
Yeah.
You see that?
Yes, I do.
Head of... can you see what it says? Head of SOG.
SOG and OR, so
There
Special
are.
Operations Group and Operational Resilience.
Yeah, 17th of May 2016. DAC Fenton, you mentioned his name earlier. We're familiar with him from Phase 1. Same day. And the next day, Peter Groves, 18th of May. So there's the timing on it. Are you able to explain why the TCAP form was not signed off as closed and completed until May 2016, when it was apparently being rolled out to station staff and senior officers in August 2014?
No, I have no idea. I'm sorry. It seems very bizarre for it to be signed some 2 years later.
Yeah. Can we go back to the Rule 43 letter then, at LFB 0004289, page 6? And in the last line on that page, it says that the Brigade's work on incident command, including the case study training package, was estimated to be completed by December 2013. Now, this was this is in the letter sent by the LFB to the coroner in May 2013, as we can see from page 1. Take that from me. Do you know what the original basis of the estimate of December 2013 was?
No, I don't, and I would say that would have been a very optimistic estimation of a date at best.
Right. Gary Reason told us that the training package was not evaluated during his tenure as Director of Operations, Resilience and Training, and that might have happened after his retirement. He couldn't tell us whether that was through the ODCB, DOT, or the Operational Review Team attending high-rise incidents to see whether the training had been embedded properly. Can you help us with that?
No, I can't formally say how it was assessed. Obviously, any issues arising out of attendance at high-rise incidents of operational crews would have been picked up by the Operational Review Team and therefore would have been subject to scrutiny by ODCB and through the DIOT process. But that's not to say that that was a formal assessment of the sort of embedding of this training with crews.
To your knowledge, was this training package or these training packages ever evaluated?
To the best of my knowledge, I don't think it was, and with the benefit of hindsight and reviewing some of this training, I think that is an area where there have been deficiencies in London Fire Brigade throughout a number of training interventions that I'm not sure that London Fire Brigade, ever go back and fully review how well training has been embedded and how it's embedded ongoing. I think that's a gap.
It's a gap. Do you know, you've given us the benefit of your evidence and your view about it being a gap, do you know whether before you left the LFB that had been identified as a gap? The way you've just explained it.
No, I don't believe so. It wasn't something that I don't think I had considered or anyone else. It's only in reviewing this and considering the issues that we're looking at here that I think that what happens is that a piece of training takes place. There is reviews that the training's taken place because that's registered on the STEP process, so you can see the percentage of staff that have undertaken it. And then I don't think that anything then goes back to see how well that's been embedded, because invariably with a large organisation like London Fire Brigade, something else comes along. And I know that whilst we were developing this, we had another fire that resulted in some very serious injuries to firefighters that then became the focus of developing another training package. So I think part of the problem is the continual development of new training in response to either national policy, a national event or something like this. And I think as a result of that sort of completing of that circle to discover whether or not something's been fully embedded isn't something that happened.
I mean, given the significance of the Lacknell House incident, given the amount of resources devoted to identifying actions and their cure, given the recommendations and then the efforts put into addressing those, and given the fact that this training package or these training packages were the result of that, surely it was essential, wasn't it, to evaluate whether they were any good?
Yes.
And was that not at the heart of your department's function?
No, I don't think that was ever fully considered by anybody, including myself, and I think it should have been. But it would have been the responsibility of a number of us, not least of all the large number of highly experienced operational officers that were, took part as part of ODCB, which is, I think, where it should have sat.
Yes.
And I think that was something that we failed to do.
Yes, but for your part as ACOA, do you accept responsibility for your part in that gap?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Now, let's then turn to Babcock and Babcock's review of incident command training as against the Coroner's 7 incident command training recommendations. You're familiar with the other TCAP you mentioned, TCAP 0124, yes?
Yes, I am.
Now, let's look at the Incident Command Rule 43 pro forma at LFB 000034062 and go back to point B, page 22, please. Now, as I say, Gary Reason dated this at about May 2013, at day 180, page 160, lines 1 to 11. And if we look at the first half of B, it says, the LFB will engage with our training contractor to ensure the points specifically listed in recommendations 1 to 7 are addressed in the current review process of incident command training. This work will aim to ensure that the training provided enhances performance across the range of required skills and knowledge needed to support effective incident command. I've read that to you before. I reread it now because I'm going to focus on that. First, we heard evidence from Peter Groves on the problems that the Brigade experienced when asking Babcock to develop incident command training. And he put it down to a lack of subject matter experts in Babcock or available to Babcock. Gary Reason agreed with that in his evidence. My first question to you is, do you agree?
Absolutely.
You do. That being so, was any consideration given that you can recall to undertaking this Rule 43 request internally, for example, within your own operational assurance department, as opposed to by Babcock?
I would love to have done. Unfortunately, two things prevented that. One was the fact the details of the outsourced training contract did not provide for London Fire Brigade to conduct its own training across. There were that whole range of training that was part of the Babcock contract that meant that we weren't allowed to develop our own training, not least of all because we had disbanded the training department as part of the outsourcing of the contract. My team would simply not have been able to do that, the size of the team and the amount of other work requirements. But the frustration that I know that I felt, along with a number of other colleagues, about the speed with which we were able to develop any incident command training was a constant subject of conversation between myself and Gary Reason, subsequently myself and James Dalgleish, because it was so frustratingly slow and we were devoting a lot of time and resources from my department, my team, for people trying to support that because of the lack of expertise they had within Babcock's.
You weren't involved, I think, in the negotiation of the Babcock contract.
No, I wasn't.
Nonetheless, are you able to give us any sort of insight about why, when the Babcock contract was signed off, there was no exception made for doing anything within the brigade by way of response to the then impending inquest?
Unfortunately not. I think that would be a matter for Ron Dobson or someone from CMB to answer. It was something that we felt quite keenly as something that obstructed our ability to progress certain items very quickly because of having to go through the external training provider.
Now, the frustration you've just, that's the right word, you've just expressed, was that something that you yourself, or to your knowledge others, expressed to the CMB before the Babcock contract was signed off, or was it something that you experienced only after it was signed?
It was only after. We weren't aware of how much it would impact, and I don't think anyone anticipated the huge impact and delays it would bring by having an external training provider.
Going back to the pro forma, we were told again by Peter Groves and Gary Reason that the reference to the, do you see it says current review process of incident command training? That was a reference to Babcock's review of incident command that was intended to be completed in April of 2015, taking 3 years from April 2012. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do.
That's what that means. We also heard from them that the intention was to work those 7 recommendations into the ongoing Babcock Incident Command course review. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do.
In fact, I think it's right, isn't it, that although it was intended to finish in April 2015, that review was still continuing as at the date of the Grenfell Tower fire, wasn't it?
I believe so, yes.
Am I right in saying that as ACOA with responsibility for incident command and subsequently Director of Safety and Assurance from January 2016, you yourself were heavily involved in the incident command course review?
I'm not heavily involved. I was involved, not as I wasn't able to commit as much time as I would have liked to it because it was something that was very important to me. But definitely when I was the Assistant Commissioner of Operational Assurance, I met regularly with Babcocks, with colleagues, to discuss the progress of it because of how frustratingly slow it was.
Yes. And can we take it that you were therefore, even if not heavily or not as closely involved as you would have liked, you were involved from the review's inception in 2012?
Yes, so initially, when Babcock's, one of the unfortunate things was when Babcock's first took over the training for London Fire Brigade is as part of the initial plan that was part of the tender is that there was due to be a year where there would be effectively London Fire Brigade training working alongside Babcock training. So a year of handover process of all of the training materials and everything else working alongside each other. And unfortunately, due to political reasons, it was decided that it would be a drop-dead start date for Babcocks. So they started and were completely responsible from day one for all of the training. But as part of that, they had undertaken to review all aspects of training, of which incident command was one of the first key reviews they were undertaking. But I think that fell into the same problem areas as developing incident command training in that they had a lack of subject matter expertise in the area.
Right. Well, we'll come to look at in a little bit more detail in a moment about some of that. But can we take it that you were involved from the start and were still involved up until your appointment as interim commissioner in January 2017?
Yes.
Yes. Was the intention at the time of this pro forma in May 2013 to put the coroner's Rule 43 recommendations and indeed Babcock's own own findings to the extent that they existed in current training at the centre of the IC course review?
Yes, it was.
It was. Now, we know that the LFB's work on this Rule 43 recommendation was overseen, at least so it appears, by the ODCB and the Lakenal House Working Group. Gary Reason told us that the information gathering for both of those entities merged into one, as he put it, because he would use the updates given to the ODCB, in other words, those provided by your team. Do
Yes.
you agree?
Yes,
I think you told us that earlier. And he said that he was entirely dependent on the updates sent through to the ODCB. That was day 181 at page 48, line 19 to 49, line 3, for our references. Do you agree with that?
I would say that Gary had a far better understanding than that because it was a conversation that was explored at both our Directorate Management Board and in one-to-one meetings. Gary Reason is probably one of the most detailed people I have ever worked for, in that he was definitely not the sort of person who would just accept what was given to him on face value. He would explore the detail and dig down into that. He had a great fondness for a red pen on his reports, and was very fond of, and quite rightly, of challenging and asking for detail. So a number of ways in which he would explore what was put in the reports, and then ultimately it would go through ODCB with that layer of discussion and challenge as well.
Right. Is that a fact? Let's have a look and see what he says. Can we look at the transcript, please, for day 181, page 48? Let's see what you say about what he says. Page 48, line 19. Now, the question, you should see at line 12, is as follows. Can you explain why you didn't make it clear to the Lacknell House Working Group that, in fact, Babcock's conclusions, as you agreed with me earlier, were that the existing incident command training was at times implicit, not tightly focused, and uneven, in the sense that any given individual might or might not get that training depending on their rank? Answer at line 19. Well, I was very much dependent on the updates I got through ODCB. Obviously, if I felt they weren't robust enough or I needed more information, then I think you've probably seen emails from me that pushed back on some of the updates that we got during the life of this particular committee, because I was the one that had to face members and answer the questions. And if we turn the page, he says, so again, I hadn't seen that TCAP response. I would have been taking my cue from the information I was given. Now, can you comment on that? Is that correct, to the best of your knowledge?
The fact that Gary Reason would push back and ask for further information, definitely. I said he was very strong in that respect of wanting to find out detail and answers. And I think the fact that at the Directorate Management Board, the relevant staff who worked here, including myself, Peter Groves and James Dalgleish, who were all very heavily involved in updates regarding incident command training and the frustrations with Babcock's, meant that we had a lot of conversations around this, and we raised a lot of concern around the delays. Let's look on.
Question at line 4. I mean, had you seen that TCAP response, can we take it that you would not have allowed the text such as this to appear in this action update? I would probably have been a little bit more careful about expressing it slightly differently, yes. Can we take it that you never yourself took steps to verify the findings of Babcock's Rule 43 review, or ask anybody in your own directorate to do so, as against what Commissioner Cotton was giving you, or Assistant Commissioner Cotton? Yes, as she was then. Assistant Commissioner Cotton, that was the job of the commissioning department. I wasn't going to check on every piece of work. I mean, I had a big job, and I was, like all top managers, very busy, and, we relied on our heads of service and their teams that worked for them to do this work. And I had no reason to doubt, based on my meetings with AC Cotton and what I saw was going on at my level, that this was being progressed appropriately. Do you agree with that? It's a general summary of the way you worked, or he worked.
Yeah, I agree that Gary Reason had a very big job and a large directorate, but I would also say that he was very well informed because of the one-to-one meetings and the Directorate Management Board meetings where we raised concerns, and the delay in Babcock's training was a subject that was, I would suggest, on most of the agendas for those meetings.
Yeah. In general, where he says at line 20, I had no reason to doubt, based on my meetings with AC Cotton and what I saw was going on at my level, that this was being progressed appropriately. To your recollection, did AC Reason ever challenge you on what you were telling him?
I wouldn't say he challenged me. We just had open conversations about the progress that wasn't being made or was being made and was frustratingly slowly. So I wouldn't say he was challenging me. We just had conversations around how the work was going and what the issues were.
Let's then look at the monitoring reports to the LHWG on this topic, which is the development of the Incident Command Course Review. We start with the first monitoring report in August 2013, which we saw earlier, LFB 000067820. You can see the first page. We saw this before. This is for Monday the 30th of September 2013. note of the meeting of the 28th of August 2013. And if we go, please, to page 11, we can see the beginning of the monitoring report. There it is. Note the colour coding: red, overdue; amber, action being taken to address; green, on target; blue, completed. Just note that there. Mm-hmm. And on the right-hand side, you can see that it says action update to August 2013. If we go, please, to page 13, we can see that the update for recommendation on incident command starts at the bottom of page 13. Do you see?
I do, yes.
And there is B, review, in the second column from the left, review incident command training to ensure the 7 points are adequately covered. And that's the 7 points, isn't it, from the recommendations by the coroner. And if you look at the last column on the right-hand side, it says this: Babcock have recently completed a full review of incident command training, and a draft course review report was received by officers on 2nd of August 2013. This is now being considered and will inform revisions and improvements to the suite of incident command training solutions. Officers also instructed Babcock to confirm that all 7 incident command related recommendations are sufficiently and, if you turn the page, comprehensively covered within the existing suite of training courses. Babcock has confirmed that all 7 issues are covered in the existing suite of command training, albeit that there may be opportunities to emphasise the Lacanal event during some inputs. This will be discussed at the next Incident Command Forum meeting, which is scheduled for the 5th of September 2013. Gary Reason told us, Ms. Cotton, that Babcock's confirmation would have been given to your department, the OA department. Is that right?
I believe it was given to Peter Groves, because Peter Groves was the interface between London Fire Brigade and the Babcock training contract, and therefore his department was overseeing all of the reviews that Babcock were involved in and reporting back through him. Clearly the information would have been shared with my department as the overall in charge of incident command, but Peter Groves' team was the one that were working with Babcock's on the review right across the piece, because they were the sort of area that worked most closely with Babcock, so it was that team that were sharing that information.
Right. But was it not you who put the sentence "Babcock has confirmed that all 7 issues are covered" into this document?
Not me personally. I'm not sure whether it was someone from my team or someone from Peter Groves' team.
I see. Can you tell us when or how Babcock provided the brigade with the information?
No,
the confirmation.
No, unfortunately, in the course of my preparing for this, I can't find any evidence of how that information was shared.
Do you know how Babcock conducted its Rule 43 review?
No, I'm unaware. I know that they were looking at all of the incident command training and looking at all of the tactical decision, TDEs, exercises and things, and they had, as part of their staff, 2 or 3 retired officers from London Fire Brigade who were assisting with that review process. So I would guess, although I can't confirm, that they were involved in that.
Do you know what the methodology was used by Babcock to conduct that review?
No, I'm unaware.
You don't know. Do you know how Babcock assured itself that the existing suite of command training really did get to grips with the coroner's recommendations, not least given that they weren't subject matter experts?
No, they had subject matter experts within their team. As I said, the retired senior officers from London Fire Brigade would be considered subject matter experts because they had not long retired and were experienced senior officers. So that I presume, although I can't say that they would have been working on that, but right. I can't confirm that.
Did you yourself have any input into or oversight over the review?
No, because that was a specific review to be conducted by the external training provider, which didn't have a London Fire Brigade input into it.
So that it would follow from that nobody else at the LFB had any input into the review either?
Not as far as I'm aware, no.
No. Do you know that when the results of that review were received, anybody asked Babcock how do they go about doing it?
I'm not sure. What I'm not sure about is whether or not anyone from Peter Groves' team, as the interface team, was involved in the design of any of those reviews. I'm not sure, but they would have been the people who, if anyone was involved, would have been.
Did you or anybody else ever sense check Babcock's conclusions?
I didn't personally. I'm not sure if anyone else did.
Right. Let's look at their conclusions, please. And we'll start with the TCAP 0124 form at LFB 403716. Is it right that this document, being a TCAP entitled Enhanced Incident Command Training Based on Lacknell Inquest's Rule 43 recommendations, was the document and indeed the process that facilitated Babcock's Rule 43 review?
Yes.
Yes. On page 3, if we go to it, please, we can see from the version control table that this form was first raised as version 0.1 on the 3rd of June 2013 by Mike Curran as a first draft. You can see that. And if you go to page 5, and it evolves till August 2016, if you go to page 5 of this TCAP form, background stroke context is set out there, as you see. And if you cast your eyes down to the bottom of the page, bottom of the screen, underneath the 7 incident command items that come from the Rule 43 recommendations, there's a paragraph that says this: with respect to the points specifically listed above in 1 to 7, these need to be addressed to ensure the training provided enhances performance across the range of skills required, in particular recently published / revised policies below. Babcock are expected to provide a proposal detailing the changes to courses to achieve a greater and enhanced level of incident command training than is already delivered based on the points 1 to 7 above. Now, again, why were Babcock only asked to make a proposal which covered changes to existing courses as opposed to creation of a whole new training course or exercise focusing on the points that arose from Lacknell?
I don't know, but if I were to make my best guess on it, I would suggest that the idea of TCAP 0153 of the Lacknell House case study was that was a completely new case study training package that would also encompass those 7 points, and that the points raised here were that at every opportunity of incident command training, that these points should be included, and that Babcock's, as the training provider, should ensure that they are front and foremost in a range of incident command interventions, so that it wouldn't just be a one-off intervention, and when people went for incident command training from crew manager up to senior officers, that these points would be addressed.
But that's a guess.
That's an educated guess, yes.
Yes. Now, the proposal document that came with this TCAP is at LFB 000381170. If we can just please look at that. The file information tells us that this document was generated on the 19th of September 2013 and called TCAP number 0124 Enhanced Incident Command Training based on Lacknell Inquest's Rule 43 recommendations. That's the file information. Take that from me, Ms. Cotton, if you would. Just looking at the document on the screen, it's entitled TCAP number 0124 Enhanced Incident Command Training, etc. Have you seen it before? Do you recall this document?
I didn't see it at the time. I have seen it in my preparation for giving evidence.
Now, Gary Reason told us that it would have been the job of the commissioning department, in other words, your department, I think, to evaluate and sign off any proposals like this from Babcock. Do you agree?
In conjunction, yes, with the team of people who devised TCAP. So it was never solely the responsibility of a commissioning department. It would have been done in conjunction with the team from Peter Groves's department, who were the ones who worked on all of the TCAPs. So I think that was supposed to be a safeguard to ensure it wasn't just one person or one individual signing a document off. It was the group of people who developed it and who were the sort of subject matter experts who would sign off. Right.
So you weren't involved with this document at the time?
No, I wasn't.
And you didn't see it at the time?
No, I didn't.
Right. We have Peter Graves's evidence about it and Gary Reason's evidence about it and its contents. I don't think I need to trouble you with that. But can I just ask you, if you go to page 3, just to help me with one part of it, which is the second paragraph below the table, under the heading Training Proposal. It says TCAP 0124 requires enhancements to incident command training based on Lachnal Inquest's Rule 43 recommendations. The 7 recommendations relate to areas of incident management training that, although currently delivered through existing training, require enhancement to meet the TCAP requirement. And the rest of the document goes on, particularly at page 14, to detail the proposal for the enhancement, namely to develop some CDEs, command decision exercises, which would specifically address each of the 7 recommendations made by the coroner. That's right, I think, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, we can look at the document. Why enhancement? Why not recreation?
Potentially that is because of the length of time it takes to develop a new training package right from scratch. And that may well have been as a response to the frustrations that I know that were shared at Gary Reason's, the directorate level, with Babcock's as a training provider in the delay it took to develop anything. So it may well be that it was deemed more appropriate to attempt to enhance an existing training package to include those points rather than to go back to the beginning and start on what would inevitably a 2 to 3 year process to develop a new training package. But I'm not sure that's the reason. But I know at the time there were concerns around every new TCAP and the delay and length of time it was taking to develop it.
Now, we'll come back to the command decision exercises in due course, more likely tomorrow. But for the time being, let's just go back, if we can, to the August 2013 monitoring report update provided for the Monday 30th of September 2013 meeting we saw earlier. LFB 000067820, page 14. If you look at the right-hand side of the document, the second line down, it says, as I've shown you, Babcock has confirmed that all 7 issues are covered in the existing suite of command training, albeit that there may be opportunities to emphasise the Lachnal event during some inputs. Now, when we put this wording to Gary Reason, he suggested that the wording could have been more, as he put it, explicit, and suggested that he was very much dependent on the updates that he got through ODCB, in other words, from you. We've seen that before. Can you tell us why you didn't make it clear in your update, either to the ODCB or to Gary Reason, that Babcock's ultimate conclusion was that the LFB's training required enhancement and refinement in order to meet the Coroner's Rule 43 recommendations?
Once again, I didn't word this, so I can tell that because it's exceptionally poorly worded, in my opinion. And I'm surprised that passed through ODCB with wording in such poor manner, because that would not normally have happened. So, no, I can't confirm that because I think it should have been made far more explicit about what Babcock said. And I think just using the word Lachnal event is a very poor choice of words.
Indeed. Did you not see this there at the time?
I can only think I would have done as part of the ODCB reporting process, which is why I'm surprised that it is worded in such a fashion.
Well, that's why I'm asking you. Can you explain, given your role on the EDCB at the time and as ACOA at the time, why wording like that went past you?
No, I can only apologise. It's very poor wording and should never have happened.
Presumably that didn't give you cause for concern at the time because you didn't spot it?
No, it would have given me cause for concern if I'd spotted it, and I would have made sure it had been reworded. So obviously it... And I'm very surprised that it got through the scrutiny of everybody, especially including the Deputy Commissioner and Gary Reason, both of whom were very particular in wording that was used in documents, and especially with wording that was going to be shown to members at the Lachnal House Working Group.
Can I then take this on and look at the development of the command decision exercise, particularly Holcroft House? Mr. Chairman, this is a new topic or subtopic, and I may or may not finish it by 4:30, but I'd quite like to make a start on it.
Yeah, that's all right, yes.
Thank you. Can we go back then to Babcock's proposal to develop command decision exercises in order to meet the coroner's 7 incident command recommendations? And I'd like to start with LFB 0011 5289. This is the covering email to the Babcock proposal we've just seen, created in September 2013, we looked at. It's an email of the 19th of September 2013 from Doug Massey of Babcock to Stephen Green, who's in the L&DS. That's the Learning and Development Strategy arm of the training department, I think, as Gary Reason told us. And what he says is this: Steve, thanks for your time this morning. I've had a go at laying out a table around the issues we discussed. I haven't found it as straightforward as I thought it would be, so we need to kick this into shape between us if we can. I've added what has already been shared with LFB after the table to give context. By way of explanation, my definition of a command decision exercise is a Minerva-type exercise to ensure maximum consistency. This proposal is to develop a sufficient number of exercise scenarios. We have identified 16 that are suitable to start with. I anticipate ultimately the number needed will be well into double figures. And as explained in the proposal, the idea is to give each role, CM to DAC plus, 2 exercises each, working in syndicates of 3 or 4 people. The first CDE is common to all. The second is different scenario to each syndicate, shared learning and debrief as we discussed. The CDE will be delivered in syndicate rooms with a trainer present and facilitating. Now, Mr. Massey refers there, as you can see, to developing a sufficient number of exercise scenarios with 16 already having been identified as suitable and sufficient, as he says. Do you know how many command decision exercises Babcock or the LFB initially envisaged creating in response to the coroner's recommendations?
No, I don't. But to set some context to that, the issue is that you couldn't just have one command decision exercise, because inevitably, with the way of any large organisation, and London Fire Brigade is no different, once a number of officers and or crews had gone through that command decision, they would then have had a conversation with other officers so that anyone turning up for the training would effectively understand what the injects would be and what the process would be, and therefore the testing of their ability would be tainted, as it were. And we were familiar with this as a process from promotion processes where, despite saying to the candidate, when you leave the room, please don't discuss this, it's not in your interest for someone else to understand what exercise it is, inevitably they would share it with someone who would share it with somebody. So we would have to have a large number of different exercises to be able to ensure that it was rigorously testing officers in their ability to respond. So I'm not sure that anyone came up with what would be a perfect number, but it would have to be a large number of varied exercises to ensure that we gave each person a fresh experience and it wasn't just a recycled exercise.
Right. Would that large number be more than 16, do you think? He says well into double figures.
Ultimately, yes, it would have to be, especially if that was going to be used in ongoing training, because you wouldn't want to repeat the same training intervention for somebody in 2 years running. And if you're talking about having syndicates of 4 people in a room, if you add that maths across it, it would be, you'd have to have a number of different interventions to ensure that people weren't having a repeat of the same exercise.
Now, let's go to LFB 000387170. We can see the suitable exercises, the 16 suitable exercises set out in Babcock's proposal document here. And if you go, please, in this document to page 16, this is the September document of 2013. On page 16 is section 6, existing training, which says the following table lists current incident management training exercise scenarios that encompass all 7 Rule 43 recommendations. Each exercise scenario will deliver the requirements of all 7 recommendations as a core activity of delegate participation. Additionally, a range of supplementary exercise injects will allow training staff the flexibility to emphasise the requirement of 1 or more of the Rule 43 recommendations by configuring the development of the exercise scenario as it progresses, aligned to delegate need and or LFB requirement. And then there's a table below that, The first column in the table is entitled Incident Management Training Minerva / Command Decision Exercise Number and Title. And the second column contains the scenario description. First, did you ever look at these training courses to satisfy yourself that they would address what had emerged from the Lacknell House incident, from the coroner's findings and her Rule 43 recommendations?
No, I didn't.
Why is that?
Because there were a dedicated team of people working on it. You just saw Steve Green from the Learning and Development Strategy, who was a very competent operational officer, along with Doug Massey, who was one of the recently retired senior officers. Not to put too fine a point on it, I would simply have not had time to go through those individually myself. But these were, a large majority of these were existing London Fire Brigade training scenarios that were handed over to Babcock. So they weren't ones that Babcock's had developed, I believe.
Right. Did anybody, to your knowledge, did anybody actually do the exercise I've just put to you, namely sit down, look at these exercises, analyse them and ask themselves the question, do they satisfy what emerges from the incident, from the coroner's findings and her Rule 43 recommendations?
I think that's what Doug Massey was referring to in the email to Steve Green, that's what he was trying to map out, and it was more complex than he thought. Not specifically in relation to these, but I was met with a number of the individuals in the Babcock training team around Incident Command, where they had fleshed out the contents of a number of Incident Command training interventions and had printed them out on sheets of paper that covered the wall of an entire office, where they tried to do the breakdown of what each individual training exercise covered and what areas it covered. So I do know it was a very complex piece of work that took some time and was indeed far more difficult than I think was initially anticipated.
Doug Massey, was he an ex-LFB firefighter or?
Senior officer, yes.
Senior officer he was. And even he found it difficult?
Yes, indeed.
Right. So your answer, I think, is the exercise was done, but not by you.
No.
Let's then look at the next iteration of the monitoring report at LFB 000067832. We saw the monitoring report of August for September. This is the version for November, and the meeting of the LHWG on the 14th of November 2013, as you can see. Item 4 in the agenda there is the action plan monitoring report. Can you see that?
Yes.
And if we go to page 25, we can see the beginning of that document. And there on the right-hand side, you can see action update, November 2013. And in the far right column under that, we can see the first two paragraphs of the update are the same as the previous update from the August of that year, weren't they?
Yes, they are.
Yes. Let's then look at the third penultimate paragraph down, the third one, which is penultimate. And it says this: the Babcock Incident Management suite of training interventions specifically relevant to high-rise scenarios are regularly monitored by the Operational Assurance Department through direct observation through the Operational Review Team, ORT officers, that attend training events and command assessments. This has confirmed that the 7 IC-related issues are fully embedded within all incident command training exercises. Now, the Operational Review Team sat within your department, didn't it?
They sat within it for responsibility, but I didn't own the Operational Review Team officers. They were 8 officers that belonged to different departments, predominantly in Dave Brown's operations world, so they may well have been borough commanders or somebody in the regulatory fire safety team, but they were senior officers who had an additional role of a tag of being an Operational Review Team.
You say they sat within it for responsibility. Does that mean you were responsible for them in this context?
Only in the context of their additional ORT tag, not for their normal management or their normal day-to-day job. This was a specific role that enabled them to carry pages, and they would be mobilised to incidents of 6-pump fire and above to carry out the quality assurance. So from the overarching part of that, ORT, yes, but not. Unfortunately, I didn't own them and I didn't have say over their day-to-day work.
Right. Breaking that up a little bit, if I can, then, it says that the monitoring is done regularly by the Operational Assurance Department. That's you.
Yes. what I think this is trying to say, but once again, I think actually Gary worded this, is that where they could, the operational review team would attend training events and incident command assessments to observe that training. But it was not every training event because there were only 8 of them, and they had a day job as well. But where possible, they would attend to perform some quality assurance. But it was not every single event by any means. I would probably guess they attended 1 in every 6 to 8 training events, simply because of the volume of training that was going on and the additional responsibility they had for their day jobs.
Did the operational review team, as referred to here at least, begin regularly attending incident command training and assessments after the coroner's Rule 43 recommendations in order specifically to review its compliance with those recommendations?
Only where possible. It was ad hoc because of the limited number of them and, as I say, and their day job requirements and their operational cover requirements.
You say only ad hoc. If only ad hoc, how could it be reliably the case that the ORT could, as it says, confirm that the 7 incident command related issues are fully embedded within all incident command training exercises?
I don't think that's an accurate reflection of what happened.
Right. So to that extent, this update to the Lacknell House Working Group was overstated and misleading.
Yes, and I'm also somewhat bemused, confused by the fact that it's marked complete, because it clearly wasn't.
And that was my next question, and that was also overstated and misleading, yes?
Yeah, I have no idea why anyone would consider that to have been complete, because at this stage we were very far from completing the enhancement that Babcock's were going to undertake to embed fully those 7 recommendations, so it was in no way complete.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment?
Yes, it's suitable as far as you're concerned, I hope.
We will come back first thing tomorrow morning to continue this theme with
Yes.
the next set of documents, but it is convenient for the time being.
Right, thank you very much. Well, that's a good point at which to close for the day. We'll finish there. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to come back again tomorrow, but
Yes.
I think you were expecting that anyway.
Yes, sir.
And again, I'm going to have to ask you not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it over the break. And we'll resume, please, at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Thank you, sir.
All right? Thank you very much. I'd like to go to the usher, please. Thank you, Mr. Millett. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, then, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.